After the camp, my players and I ran up to him and started doing the gritty. And he got mad.
I'll never forget the face of this cheerleader for the rest of my life.
Have you met the football players? They're the worst guys on campus.
Kid's like, yeah, we know blue too. And it's like yelling it out and stuff.
Sometimes he'll be in the hallway just pounding push-ups, going like, "Great morning, gentlemen!"
Right.
She'd have to use the bleep button a lot.
That might be.
Welcome everybody into
Your
our big time episode here. We got episode 25.
How about that? How about that?
We're a quarter of the way to 100. That's kind of insane. But
Almost there.
Yeah, we're almost there.
Almost halfway.
We have a very special guest,
Dr.
Aubrette Kinne. Thank you so much for joining us. She is helpful in so many ways to our team. This idea was actually, it was given to us by somebody, a listener.
Yes.
And they said, hey, this is really important. You guys should do an episode on mental health awareness. Bring somebody on who knows about it, talks about it, and you guys can go into it because it's so prevalent right now and it's so important. Yeah. And obviously it's important to both of us. So,
and I told her that we were going to do it and when we were in Hawaii, and that was in like June.
Yeah.
And then
correct.
And then we had a couple other ones and then took a break, and so now we're doing it in August.
Yeah.
So
but it's nonetheless probably our most important episode. You could argue. I mean,
yeah.
It's up there. But
No pressure.
thank you. Yeah, no pressure. But thank you so much for joining us. You are the team psychologist, right? Like you're assigned to us, and and you help us out in, like I said, so many ways. But thank you for coming on. This will be great.
Yeah, I'm really excited and appreciate you guys doing an episode like this because you're right, it is such an important topic, and August is perfect. Back to school, good time to do an episode like this.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. I wanna start it off by asking if you saw what Ph.D Pimblet said. He's a UFC fighter, and
has
Patrick,
a sick accent.
You saw it, yeah. He's big time. He's like an up and coming fighter, and he's kind of nuts, like in a way you could say. Like he's like when he fights, like he's like shaking his tongue, like
he's crazy.
Yeah, but after the fight, like instead of like talking about like his opponent, none of that. Like he talked about one of his best friends committed suicide, and he said like, please like speak out. Like I'd rather you crying with me than me crying at your funeral. Like it's so important. Like please like find somebody to talk to. So I was just wondering if you saw that.
I haven't seen that specific one, but
I want to send it to you.
So yeah, please.
Yeah.
So many athletes from Olympic, professional, college, youth, even coaches. I mean, it's such a prevalent conversation all across athletics, sports, and cuts across. You know, it's the one thing that cuts across race and gender and ethnicity and, you know, where you're from and how many people are in your family and what sport you play. Mental health affects everybody. It doesn't care who you are or, you know, what your shooting percentage is, or it doesn't care about any of that. So all of us, you know, can be vulnerable and need to feel brave to speak out when we're going through something and to talk to our friends, family, or seek professional help if it gets, you know, if that's something you need to.
Yeah, definitely. Have you noticed a severe uptick recently in people feeling comfortable to the point to come out and actually talk about maybe their issues or be someone that somebody else can come out and talk with you? Have you noticed, like, you know, there's been a lot more of that happening? People starting to begin to feel more comfortable.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I think we see that at all levels. There's, like I said, there's been more professional athletes, Olympic athletes thinking about Simone Biles on the biggest stage of her career, perhaps, and it's like, nope, my mental health is more important. Her sport is very dangerous, quite literally, but she knew she had to take care of herself, and that came at a great sacrifice, but she was willing to put that first, and that, I think, trickles down. And I should say we see all kinds of other athletes, too. You know, Kevin Love has spoken about it as well.
Naomi Osaka.
Right, exactly. So tons and tons of athletes, and that really just trickles down to our student athletes as well, not only at Iowa, but across the country. And talking with my colleagues, we're all seeing the same thing, an uptick in people seeking help, an uptick in the severity of mental health issues that we're seeing, but also an uptick in people willing to talk about it. We track our numbers in a variety of ways, like how many athletes are coming in from what sports, what year in school, just so we can kind of note any of these trends. And we do that without names attached. It's just data. But we also track referrals. Like, so how did you come here? Who encouraged you to come in? And we see more and more people checking off the teammate box or a friend box. And I think that's a really powerful sign that people are talking about mental health. It's not just a staff member, a physician, or even a coach saying you need to come in and seek some support. Peers are saying it to each other. And then I think that the biggest thing, I was so excited and so proud of this, we had a panel of student athletes, a committee put together a panel of student athletes, a former student athlete and a coach, to talk about mental health. I believe that was back in April. And that was amazing to see current student athletes here talk to their peers. I think we had 125 student athletes in attendance, and just listen to their stories about mental health. So it was really powerful to hear them share their perspectives and their experience. And we saw people reach out immediately saying, I heard so-and-so speak at this event, and it was the thing that told me I needed to reach out for help. So it directly affected people, which is amazing.
So, yeah.
Do you think this is, obviously that's awesome. That event was awesome. Kind of changing the subject, but not really. Do you think COVID was the cause, or not a cause, but do you think COVID had an effect on maybe the uptick in people having those type of issues?
Oh, without a doubt.
Yeah.
I mean, that affected, I don't know how that didn't affect everybody, right? Being in isolation, you can't do what you're used to doing. I mean, we lose so much. We lose our freedoms. We lose our identity. Certainly as student athletes, your lives are very directly affected. But even as we saw stuff kind of come back, student athletes being able to compete, there was a constant fear that someone was going to get COVID and then not be able to play and possibly jeopardize their team's ability to compete and win, but also potentially take down their teammates with them.
Yeah.
So that was a lot of stress and pressure. And then certainly there's the health aspect. People are worried about actually being ill and having some long-term effects from that, which we have seen some long COVID in student athletes. And so there was a lot of worry and stress in our population, but nationally across the board, and it's still present. It's less identified, but it's almost like this lingering mood dampener or anxious feeling that just hasn't fully gone away yet.
Yeah.
So it's persisting.
A night out at El Rey's is a great time because you got the live music in the front, which is usually some country vibes, a little bit, but you can go to the back and then it's like a nightclub type atmosphere. So you get the best of both worlds from both sides, and bartenders take care of you. It's a good spot. We know some bouncers there, great dudes. Yeah. Shout out Loudon. And the owner is also a phenomenal guy. So
based on the lines, you would think that the music is unbelievable, which it is. So I highly suggest that everybody goes to El Rey's.
It's packed all the time.
Hey Connor, remember when we went to the Kimball Beecher Family Dentistry?
I do. It was a great spot.
They got us out. They got us in and out quick. Very thorough teeth cleaning, and they told me my teeth were amazing.
So they are good at lying as well.
Well, I would hope that. I would hope not.
Well, normally at the dentist, you don't get in and out very quick, and they got us right in, took care of everything. The nurses were great. The dentist was great that we saw. They have multiple locations, and they take care of you. So we have to shout out the Kimball Beecher Family Dentistry.
Mr. Beecher is the man.
He brought us he's the GOAT. Yeah. No, that entire season was just a year full of anxiety. I was more worried about, and this sounds insane, but I wasn't worried about getting sick. I was more worried about the season getting shut down because of something I did or because of something one of my teammates did than actually the person's health. And everyone still reacts different to COVID. Some people it's a cold and it's fine. Some people get really, really sick. And so you never know what it's going to be with certain people. But So like with that being said, I still like I was so like tricked out like in my mind to where my anxiety was at a place where I was just nervous all the time that somebody was out like doing something that was going to jeopardize like our entire season.
Yeah.
And like I was just and that's obviously like a really bad way to think about it, because you would want to be, I mean, you want to think about people's health and them actually being safe and keeping your team safe. But that was not even in the forefront of my mind at the time, just because of how much like was going on. Did you like have a sense of that in any way at all, or no?
I had other shit though. Like I was struggling with other shit. So like, yeah, like when I was like, I wasn't really as worried about everybody else, because I figured, you know,
were just
I was just like I was just trying to figure out my own shit at that point in time. It was such a weird point in time, because like couldn't really see anybody. Like we played on Christmas. That was weird. Like that was weird. And there was just like a whole bunch of stuff, and it's like to the outside, like our season was like a sense of normalcy to people. So like they still talked about us the same, and they kind of, it's like going through all of that and like, you know, kind of being isolated is hard. Or like when we beat North Carolina at Carver, there's 8 people in the stands, and after the game I just go to my apartment, and like that was it. Like that was miserable. Yeah. And so it's just like after all that stuff, like we couldn't really celebrate. If you did, you felt guilty. Like nobody went downtown for the whole season, and it was just kind of like, it was just weird. And I over the pandemic I had a hard time, so I'm still kind of trying to figure all that other stuff out, and like just kind of battling every day to try to get to the bottom of it. And so that was, and then obviously being alone didn't help very much, but luckily I have great teammates, and my dad's my coach, so maybe got to see my mom a few more times, but it was good. Yeah. But it was that was hard. That was hard.
It was such a bizarre era. I mean, I know COVID is still present and it'll never go away, but that period of time where everything was so shut down and, like you said, so isolated, so disconnected, so out of sync with what you normally would get to do, it messes with your head. There's no way that it doesn't. And so we were dealing with that a lot, like in our staff and our line of work, dealing with that. And how do I play in an arena, in a stadium facility with nobody present, with crowd noise being pumped in? Like, what is that with cardboard cutouts? Which I love the creativity. Like, shout out to everybody that tried to make it as realistic as possible. But like, it's not. It's different. Yeah.
It's so weird.
There's that. There's the guilt of like, if I go to the grocery store and my like supermarket sweep, like running through as fast as I can to try not to get COVID to take my team down.
Yeah.
And then there's these bubbles that were popping up. I think it started with the NBA.
Oh my God.
Brad, your guys' athletic trainer, reached out to me. He's like, Aubrey, you just got all these rules for the bubble. Like, we have to figure out a plan because these guys are going to go crazy. So we were talking like from a mental health standpoint, what can we do to help make sure you guys don't lose your minds?
Brad brought baseballs and wiffle ball bats and footballs, which was like huge.
Yeah.
Which was huge.
Yeah.
We had to go outside.
Couldn't even go outside.
I know. I probably shouldn't even say this. I think at one point there were like ankle monitors that were being explored, and I was like, we got to fight that.
No.
We can't, like, it got
It felt
extreme.
like prison. It felt like prison.
Well, yeah. And then you guys had the Big Ten tournament and the NCAA tournament back to back, right, in Indy. So it was, or the Indy area, I guess, for the NCAA tournament. They did lots of different locations, but it was like, how long you guys were potentially going to be in Indianapolis was I think we were looking at a month. And so we were really trying to strategize, how do we keep you guys performing well, but also, you know, keep your mental health and well-being intact through all of that, because you couldn't see family, you couldn't do anything except be in your hotel and be at the facility, and that was it.
I remember like the quarantine period just sucked. We're like, because we played in the Big Ten, obviously, so I think it was us and the Pac-12 were the only two conferences that did testing every day. So we've been being tested every day for how long? Since November, maybe even October. Like we tested every day.
Yeah.
And then we get to the bubble, and like we'd already been there for the Big Ten tournament, hadn't left. we left, I understand. But like then we get there and they're like, okay, you need to quarantine. Like we're gonna test you and need to quarantine for like I think it was like 36 hours.
And we were in the same hotel.
I was in
the same room. And we just had to like re-quarantine.
And they brought us food that was just awful. And we were just like, what are we doing? Like we've none of us have had it. Can't knock on wood anymore. It's over. But the bubble's over, but COVID's not. But
Yeah.
Want to clarify that.
We
But
know what you're saying.
we had already, like, we'd been there for so long. It's just like, guys, like, I don't have it, man. Like, I just don't have it. You don't need it.
If I have it, you all gave it to us at this point because we haven't left.
Exactly. Like, I just don't have it. It's like after we got tested, remember the Big Ten? This is kind of another tangent, but the Big Ten tournament, we played Wisconsin at like 9 p.m. and it was a war, like a super physical game, super crazy. Long game, took forever. We get home at like probably 12:30, and nobody can ever sleep after games. It's really hard, and so I probably was up till at earliest I went to bed was probably 2. You can't sleep after games, and then we have Brad texts us at like 1:30, like, hey guys, like COVID testing 7 a.m. It's like, dude, like. We don't have it, man, because we played Illinois at 3. So we had to be in there at 7 a.m. to do COVID testing because they needed a certain amount of hours before the game or whatever. And we were just like, dude, just get lost, Brad.
Yeah.
Get lost.
I certainly recognize the privilege, right? People were fighting for their jobs, their lives. Like I certainly understand our student athletes have a lot of privilege and still getting to be able to play in the midst of a global pandemic that is literally killing millions.
Yeah.
So I don't want that to feel lost on this conversation.
No. Yeah.
But I also want to highlight, the stress and the sacrifice that our student athletes had to go through in that period. I mean, COVID aside, being a student athlete has a lot of privilege, but it also comes at a great sacrifice in a lot of ways. And that was, magnified in COVID as well. So I think you guys are highlighting all of the restrictions and what that really can do to somebody's mental health and wellness, even in a short time span, like a matter of a few weeks. It can have a big impact for sure.
Yeah,
absolutely.
No, definitely. I want to ask too, to kind of piggyback off all of that. How much do you stress routines, like with anyone? Like how important? Can you just speak on that, like how important like a true routine is to not only an athlete but just to an everyday citizen who is like, they have their schedule and they know what they're going to do and they rely on certain things to be in order, and then who knows what happens when that gets messed up, but it can throw people off. And whatever the case may be. So like in your experience, what is that? What would you put that as in terms of importance?
I would say it's a basic foundational need that we all have.
Yeah.
Our brain really responds to structure, consistency. And so having a routine throughout your day, throughout your week is really important. And I think that plays into the, 3 of the most important things for our overall health and well-being are sleep, exercise, and nutrition, right? And so you need to make sure that you're having consistent bedtime, consistent wake-up time, which I know is impossible in your line of work, especially with game times being all over the place. But, as much as you can, consistent sleep schedule, as much as you can, consistent nutrition schedule, and working and exercise, which obviously isn't a problem for athletes.
Yeah.
But working those things into your routine and then building the rest of just the stuff you have around it, class or work or homework. It's something we talk about pretty consistently with student athletes, certainly as a mental health side of things, but even just organization. I mean, you guys have so much you have to do on the student side of the hyphen and on the athlete side of the hyphen, plus your personal lives that you want to have as well. And so how do you fit it all in the time that you have? Once you take out all the stuff you have to do, you're not left with much. So having a good routine and structure is really important. But we also take that to the performance side of things, where we work with a lot of people, a lot of our student athletes, on how do you have a pre-game, a pre-meet, pre-performance routine that we liken to a mental warm-up. You're going to do a physical warm-up, right, to get your body in the right condition to play, to compete. You should have a similar one for your mind. So what are the mental skills that you're going to use? What are the tools? What are the visualizations? When do you start it? Like, we break all of that down and work one-on-one with athletes to create that, to help get that consistency in elite performance the key with an everyday routine or a pre-performance routine for sport is that it has to be structured, but it also has to be flexible. There could be, if we're looking at softball, for example, there could be a rain delay of 2 hours. Like, you have to be able to say, okay, I can tweak it. Or, something isn't working quite right. So I have to try a different mental skill in here today. If it's not flexible, if it's too rigid, it becomes more of a superstition. And then that actually gets in the way of good performance instead of helping it. So
that was going to be my next question. Like, how, like, adjustments within your routine, because there's so many variables that come into play. And like, we've talked about it before on the pod, like routines, like you have a routine, but you're also like superstitious. Like,
I'm so superstitious.
You're very, and like, and sometimes, like, sometimes that's good, but sometimes you need to be able to adjust a little bit as well.
Usually it never like I'm superstitious like before the game, and like I have to do the same things. But typically, if like let's say so at the Big Ten tournament, like I wanted, like when we had the same locker room the last like 3 days or whatever, I wanted to tie my shoes in the same seat. But the day of the Big Ten championship, like that seat was taken, so I had to sit somewhere else. And that bothered me. It bothers me for about like...
That shouldn't bother you, though.
Well, no, it bothers me for about 45 seconds, and then I just forget about it.
Can we like speak on that? Like, that should...
You want me to analyze that?
That should not bother.
It bothered me for 45 seconds. I'm not mad at the guy. He went and sat in the seat. But it was just like it bothered me for about 45 seconds, and then I can move on. And like obviously, like if we lose the game or if something happens, like it's not like I go back, fuck, if you weren't sitting in that seat, like so it's like so I can't, obviously that doesn't happen. And I typically forget about it, but like I like to do the same things, like especially if we've been playing well and it's been working, I want to do the same things.
And see, I'm not mad at that, because you had the key phrase in there, I can move on.
Yeah.
Right? Like if your routine, even your superstition doesn't happen the exact way you need it to, if you can move forward and know that that doesn't actually have a direct impact on your performance and isn't the cause of however you played or whatever the team's outcome was, then I'm not mad at that. Sports have superstitions. It's part of the fun of it. As long as the superstition doesn't control you, then, it's fine to have their harm. Those kind of superstitions can be harmless.
It's like when we do hip rolls before the game, like when we stretch, like my back has to crack.
I don't even want to know that.
Otherwise, it just feels weird.
That's just insane. Anyways, otherwise it feels weird. What?
It does.
Okay. Well, I wanted to bring in just a little bit of social media into this because I think there's so much like with mental health paired with social media and how people might be affected in a good or bad way in terms of what you might rely on based on a certain app, Instagram, Twitter, whatever it is, seeing positive things, seeing negative things, seeing how other people look. How do you think that that's maybe like as big of an issue right now as there is in the mental health area, like what you're seeing on social media with
comparison is the thief of joy.
Comparisons, like exactly, like that's what I'm talking about. Like I just feel like that's so it can be very, very, it can be hurtful to, for some people to see stuff, especially, I mean, athletes, obviously we've talked about that before, but just for an everyday citizen as well, who just turns on Twitter and turns on Instagram and starts worrying about things.
Absolutely. I mean, there are some benefits to social media, obviously being connected to people quickly, easily from across the globe, really. And it can have some positive messages, certainly. However, those aren't the ones that stick out to us when we're scrolling through our feed or when we're especially looking at comments on our own posts or, for you guys, stories that might be about you or your team, for our athletes. The negative stuff is going to be the stuff that sticks out. And what's concerning to me is just how vicious and graphic, honestly. I mean, I've had athletes in my office show me the DMs they're getting from fans, sometimes simply because they've lost a game or a competition. You should go kill yourself. You should tell your mom you should never have been born. I mean, these are horrific things to say to anyone, but people feel like they are brave behind their phone or their computer keyboard and they can say whatever they want, and sadly there are really no consequences to that, no punishments. So all it really does is hurt people and harm people. And so a lot of times this is something we're talking about with athletes. How do you cope with that? How do you have I don't even want to say a thick skin, because I think anybody would be affected by those kind of things. But how do you not put emphasis on that, not put stock in what this random stranger has said about you on social media, and put more stock in what you know about yourself and the hard work you put in, and what you know about what went into that game, and what the people around you that you trust and rely on and know you best, what they think about who you are and what you're doing, because those are the people that truly know you. Honestly, It's hard to sit at sporting events, because I get to know a lot of our student athletes, obviously really intimately. Doing therapy, you learn a lot about people and some stuff that nobody else knows about them. And so you hear people criticizing in the stands. Meanwhile, I know that their beloved grandmother who raised them died the day before. And they might be playing like shit that day, but obviously they're going through something. But fans don't think about that. They don't know that. They don't think about that always. And also, like, you guys are 18 to 20, 22, 23, 24-year-olds. Like, I just want to turn around and be like, what would it be like if I came to your job and just screamed at you all day for how you were doing, right? Like, especially as an 18-year-old self, right?
Yeah.
So it's hard to see that stuff come through on social media, in DMs, but the comparison game too. You know, I think everybody consciously knows that people show their best life on social media, but it's impossible to not have that secondary mechanism of comparing yourself, and then you feel bad about yourself, and it's a battle every day.
Yeah, no, for sure. I just remember, like for me, like I've kind of learned to just ignore it / not look at it. But I remember we had a conversation, and I still remember this. It was a great point. You said, okay, like, look at Tom Brady. Like, people still like criticize him, like, oh, like this should be his last year. Like, oh, he looks old. Like, he'll win like a championship, and immediately it's like, he'll win the Super Bowl. Oh, are you coming back like for another year? Like, he can't even celebrate before he gets that question. So it's like there's never enough, and that's just like the way that the sports world works. So like that's fine. Like, you just have to know that. So there's always going to be, and it's not like he's not known as one of the greatest athletes ever, but it's like, how much can this guy prove before he's just left alone and still has haters and people that are still going to say something about him. He's arguably the greatest athlete of all time. So like, you look at somebody like him, and he's still dealing with the same things that everybody else is. So there's really, I don't want to say there's no end game, but like,
no, there isn't. If LeBron James is probably the most scrutinized athlete of all time.
Which is, and he's arguably the greatest basketball player ever.
If you scrutinize LeBron James, like,
he opened a school, like he's donated like millions upon millions,
and not even about like how he is like off the court. Like if you scrutinize his play, like, just makes no sense, man. Like,
but like, it's just the way that it kind of works, and we talked about that, and that helped me, because I was like, that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about Simone Biles earlier too. I mean, there was a lot of people supporting her. I think it was probably more overwhelmingly support than criticism, but people were criticizing her, and like, she's like, I don't know where I'm at in the air. I could quite literally break my neck. Like, I could die doing this. Like, for me, it's like, not worth it. Like, but fans were like,
no,
how could you walk away from America? It's like, whoa. we're getting a little intense here, people.
Yeah, like, relax, guy.
You gave up on your country.
You're not that guy.
You hate us.
Yeah. It's the spotlight. It can do great things, but it also can be brutal. And so sometimes we're having conversations like, when do you just turn social media off? Like, for basketball, do we get into Big Ten play or postseason and you just turn it off because it's hard to filter it all out? And so I think that's a question for all of us to ask, like, knowing our limit, and when we're like, okay, hang on, stuff that I know, like in my rational brain, I know isn't true or isn't accurate, is starting to infiltrate my emotional brain. And so that's my sign. I got to take a break from social media and re-engage with, real life, real people, and connect with that again. So I think that's true for athletes and for all the rest of us.
Yeah. It's like, if we lose a couple games in a row, like, if you check Twitter, like, it's like the world's falling apart.
Yeah.
It's like, if you walk in the practice gym, like, guys are probably a little down, but like, sun came up. Like we're still playing basketball. Like we have a game in 2 days. Like we're still preparing the same way. We're still doing all that same stuff. So it's just kind of like, it's like, what do we?
Yeah, no, for sure.
There's a, I think it's Jimmy Fallon. There's a movie about the Red Sox. Jimmy Fallon, or is it Jimmy Fallon? Yeah, and he's like a Red Sox super fan, and they lose a really big game. Maybe it was a playoff game, and they went out to, like, him and his friends went out to dinner, and there were some players out to dinner too, and they're like, what the hell? There's one of the biggest games of the year. They're out to dinner, and they're like, maybe we care too much.
Yeah,
yeah, I think so.
Like, yeah. No,
they're allowed to still go out to dinner and, like, have things in life that they enjoy.
They can eat.
Like, remember this guy, this guy who, like, he tweeted, he, like, had his own podcast, and he tweeted, like Connor and Patrick, like, they just podcast too much. They're not at the gym enough. I was like, bro, like, you don't get it, brother. Like,
people were saying about J-Bo too.
Like, oh, J-Bo's too busy tweeting. He's not, like, dude, like, just.
Like, there's 24 hours in the day.
That's what I always say. Like, there's so much time. Like, you could do other things. It's like,
well, and in fact, this brings up a good piece about identity in that we actually don't. It's not healthy for anybody. We're talking about athletes. It's not healthy for athletes to just be one thing. You should not be just in your sport training all the time. It's actually better if you're well-rounded, because it doesn't feel like the world's going to end if you lose a game, because we do get athletes saying that, like, oh my gosh, my family's going to disown me, my hometown, they think I'm a hero, they're going to hate me. Like, there are all these thoughts, are real thoughts that go through people's head, because the identity of being an athlete is so, it's the only thing that's present, and it's such a weight on their shoulders. And so it's, make that important to you, dedicate yourself to that, work hard to that. But when you leave the gym, leave the gym. That's actually a good thing. That'll probably actually help you perform better at the end of the day.
Yeah. No, we're going to get right back into some identity stuff right after this.
And now a message from our friends at Vibrant who want you to take a semester off.
Okay, I know they're bankers, but they know about NCAA eligibility, right?
Not a semester off from school, a semester off from car payments. Right now, if you take out an auto loan with Vibrant or move your current loan there, you won't owe any interest or need to make a single payment for 120 days.
Well, a used Tesla is only about $50,000.
Just to be clear, you do have to make payments eventually.
But think about how much you'd save on gas.
Get the details at vibrantcreditunion.org/pocketmoney, all one word. Now, from our friends at McDonald Optical. If Mr. McDonald is nearly as feisty as he was on the sidelines watching 8 through 10-year-old Jack and his son Nolan, that means if you go to his eye doctor place, you got to be in pretty good. You got to be in good shape. He's going to take care of you.
Yeah, he's going to take care. If you're having any issues with your optics, you got to go to McDonald Optical, because he's definitely going to look after you. He's got the solution for whatever your problem might be. And great people over there, 100%.
And take care of you.
Yeah, without a doubt. Welcome back to our episode here of Teed Up.
Sorry, we were laughing. I told a really funny joke at the break.
Yeah, he's hilarious. But right before the break, we got into some stuff about identity and how you identify. Your only identity can't be as an athlete, because then so much is relied on and focused on just your athletic success. So like when you're working with athletes, like, where do you tell them to put their identities? Is it as a student? Is it as a artist? Is it as a chef? Is it, or is it really broad? Is it small? Like, what can somebody who might be listening, like, how can they start trying to rearrange the way that they think about the other things they do besides just their sport?
Yeah, it could be all of those things. I think we typically start by acknowledging how important athletics is. We don't want to minimize that, because we know for a lot of people it is a really important part of their life. At a minimum, it's something they've been doing probably for a decade by the time they get to college sports. I've had athletes that have been doing it for 2 decades, which is kind of insane when I think about that math there. So it's, for some of them, it's been the only thing that they've known. So we want to acknowledge the importance of that. And you can still work hard at that. You can still have that be a focus of your life. And how do you leave it at the gym? How do you leave it at the practice facility when you leave? What are the other things that are important to you? What are the things you're passionate about? What are the things you want to try? And so it starts really it's a really exploratory process. What are things you're interested in? Sometimes I'll give people a homework assignment of like, just scroll Pinterest for like an hour and see what jumps out at you. Is it home design and you want to start a Pinterest home design page because someday you want to, redecorate your own home, even if you don't have a home yet? Even fantasizing or dreaming about that kind of stuff can tap into a different part of your life and of your identity and something that you want. So it starts really by exploring things like that. It could be more hobby based like that, like cooking or art, music, things like that, stuff you don't really ever get time to do. It could be something simple like reading. I really love reading. Great. Go to Barnes & Noble. Financially, if you can, go to Barnes & Noble, Borders, Amazon, wherever, get a book and just start reading it whenever you get a chance to tap into that side of yourself. It could be something more values-based too. So what are the things that are important to you? What are the qualities, the characteristics? So we'll have them come up with a list. What are the top 10 things that are your values? And then how do we work from there to say, where can we find that, in your everyday life? So, one person might say adventurous. Like, I really want to be adventurous. I want to travel. I want to try new things. Okay, great. In the confines of Iowa City and being a student and an athlete, what can you do? We came up with, while the weather's nice, once a week, go out to Terry Trueblood and take a walk around. Like, just get outside, be in nature, get a new experience, or go to Lake McBride or wherever it might be. And that was something they came back and were like, whoa, that was helpful. Like, it doesn't have to be earth-shattering, life-changing things. Right. It's these small changes that can really make a difference, whether we're talking about identity or other areas of mental health too.
Yeah.
Is it harder because I was going to, like, let's say, like, it's easy if, like, there's an athlete who's struggling with identity, but they really like to draw. It's easy for you to say, like, oh, well, then just draw. Mm-hmm. Whereas I think it's probably harder for you to, like, kind of come up with, like, somebody who doesn't have any other, like, I don't really have any other hobbies. Mm-hmm. Like, I've developed them since over the years. I like to play blackjack, but like stuff like that. But so I developed hobbies, but like it took me a while. So is that probably harder than if you have somebody who has or doesn't have hobbies or has hobbies?
Yeah, I mean, certainly, right? Mm-hmm. And we see that a lot. Some sports, it's eat, sleep, breathe, insert sport name, right? Like, that's the expectation. Like I said, some people have been only playing one sport since they were 4 or 5 years old. And so that we call that identity foreclosure. It means it is closed around that one identity, and that's all they feel they are. And I think a lot of times we see the risk for more severe mental health issues, and we see that because they feel like that's all they are, but then they also feel like that's all they are to everybody else. And so if they're not doing well at that one thing, clearly they're disappointing their parents, they're disappointing their hometown, they're a failure, they can't even do the one thing right, and it spirals really quickly. And it can feel like a really lonely place to be. And then especially, if there's some sort of slump happening in their sport, then it really feels like I have nothing, and it gets to that dark place really quickly. So if there is that case where there's an absence of anything clear jumping out at somebody, we just start by talking, processing, what are conversations you have with your friends? What are things you like to talk about? When you're watching TV, what are shows that you tend to watch? Like, we start to explore the things they do in their life to see if there are any themes that are jumping out that then help us say, okay, why don't you go then try this thing that seems to fit with these other things that you like, and see if that becomes a hobby that you develop, or an interest or a passion or whatever it might be. It could be something around other parts of identity too, like it could be cultural aspects. I'm regularly encouraging student athletes to check out our cultural houses, to make connections with people that aren't student athletes and have other similar backgrounds or similar interests. Certainly, I know that Greek life is a big commitment as well, but we've had student athletes successfully be in participate in Greek life, and that might be something that they find they connect with and are passionate, and they find other people that have those similar connections too. So it's great when they can connect with athletes because they understand that life too, but people aren't one-dimensional. We're more than that. And so sometimes it's just a really broad net we cast, and try to glean some themes from that, and then help plug them into places or activities that can help foster that.
Yeah.
Something else I wanted to like. I'm sure you see this a lot, but you've heard the term burnout. Mm-hmm. So like, how often do you see that in like athletes? Like just kind of the ones you said who've been playing the sport for 2 decades when we're in college. Yeah. That's scary.
Yeah.
I'm sure there's some burnout there. So just kind of maybe just elaborate kind of on that a little bit.
Yeah, I think fortunately we don't see it. It's not too high, but we definitely get a good handful of athletes talking about their burnout experiences. Just to go back to the pandemic for a second, when everything shut down, when the Big Ten tournament for basketball got interrupted literally mid-game, on our staff, we started bracing ourselves. We kind of, we were having conversations with sports medicine, and we kind of knew what was about to happen, probably not to the extent of what happened, but we were like, this is not going to be a temporary shutdown. Like, this is going to be a big thing. Yeah. And especially when our athletes went home, wherever home is, we were really preparing for the worst, for our athletes to feel completely devastated. And many of them were, and many of them struggled. But what we heard more, and I was surprised by this, people were like, I'm so glad I'm getting a break that I didn't have to choose to take. Like, it's a guilt-free way to get a break from my sport. Yeah. So I think that spoke to a lot of burnout that people are experiencing. And so it's not, I wouldn't say it's a huge problem, at least by what gets reported to us. Obviously, we don't know what we don't know. Who's not coming in the door. We don't know what they're experiencing, but it definitely can happen, especially if there's not a good break in between seasons or training periods, because really the only remedy for burnout is to take a complete break from your sport. By the time it gets to burnout, we try to intervene before, and I think we can spot that really well and intervene there and try to help stave off burnout. But once it gets to that point, we just kind of put a Band-Aid and popsicle sticks to keep them together till the end of season, and then get a true break. And that's a place we might, if they give us permission from confidentiality standpoint, to advocate to their coaches to say, like, this person really needs a break and they need a true break. Or we use our team docs to help us advocate for that as well. But certainly our student athletes, it's something that they struggle with and at times, and need to figure out ways to give themselves permission to take that break mentally too, because there's then that guilt factor of, I'm not training, I'm not going to be ready by preseason, or I'm not going to pass the fitness test, or whatever it is that is stressing them out about returning back. They feel that guilt when they are trying to take the break. And so a lot of the work we do around burnout is, how do you give yourself permission to take that break and say it's okay, it maybe is even beneficial for my game to take a break.
Right. Yeah. Kind of pivoting with that, to a certain extent, I guess. I want to talk about why you think, or you can say if it's not, but it seems like it's more difficult for men to come out and say that they might be dealing with something off the court, on the court, whatever. It just seems like men are much more closed off, maybe, and feel like they have to put up a face. That doesn't necessarily fit in with like what other people might think about them. Mm-hmm. So why is that true? Like, do you see that as well? Like, it maybe is a little more difficult for men to like come out and say that they're struggling, and if so, why do you think that is?
Mm-hmm. Yes, I mean, statistically, we do. For our services, we do have more women reaching out than men, but it's actually quite close, and it's gotten closer over the years. I think our staff do a really intentional job of building relationships with our teams, especially teams that might be less likely to seek out help. And so we try to make us seem like not scary people. We're not going to, psychoanalyze you constantly and like ask you to talk about your
Tell me what I'm thinking.
yeah, right. We're not going to be like doodling about you while you're lying on our couch or anything. We don't even have couches to lie on. But we try to break that barrier down by showing that we're normal people. We're here to help. We're here to be supportive. We're going to have conversations. And it's hard and it's difficult to face the things you want to work on. But it also can help, it help get out of whatever it is that you're feeling. But I think men, to your question, are socialized to not feel. You're taught you're not supposed to feel. Anger is pretty much the only acceptable emotion for men. And so if you are feeling sad or down or hurt or upset, like, you better bottle that shit up, hide it away. Don't let anybody see that because you're weak, because, you're a wuss, or other words that we could insert in there, right? And so that's culturally an issue. I think that's a global issue, but certainly in America, certainly in American sports, we see that men are conditioned to think and feel that way. And then it gets really confusing because men are humans who have emotions like sad and upset and cry. And so it's like, I must not be a man if I'm feeling sad, if I'm crying about something. And so if I'm not a man, A, that's an important identity for a lot of people. And then B, I better hide that, because if I tell anybody that, I'm going to be judged, I'm going to be ridiculed. That's the thought process that goes in. And so a lot of the work that I do with some of my male clients is around emotions. How do you recognize them? How do you label them? Like, how do you call it what it is? How do you be comfortable with it? And then, like, we get to the ultimate step of how are you vulnerable? How do you tell others what you're going through? Because that is one thing that can be really helpful too, is just sharing what you're going through with others.
Is that why you think it's sometimes so difficult for not only men but also women to come out and say that they're dealing with something because of because they might just not feel comfortable coming forward? They don't know people who've done it in the past.
Mm-hmm.
Like, is that the way that men are socialized to be one specific way? Do you think that that's why it's so difficult for people to be open about it?
Mm-hmm. I certainly think that's part of it. Mental health has been stigmatized for such a long time, and like we talked about on the top of the episode, so many high-profile athletes speaking out about it certainly helped decrease the stigma quite significantly, but it's still present, and we see it happen in families too, right? Like, I've been struggling for years with depression, but I never went to a therapist because my parents don't believe in it. We hear that kind of stuff all the time. And not to say parents are bad people. They're all doing the best they can. These are generational ideas that come down, but there is this either real or perceived stigma that people are going to be judged. And that certainly doesn't just affect men, although it does affect men to a different extent than it affects women. It's more acceptable for women to cry for whatever reason, although we get called names for that kind of stuff too. And it's the opposite, right? You can't be angry as a woman because then you're a bitch, right? And so I think and across the gender spectrum, right, there are different labels and stereotypes. So all of that feeds into the stigma that teaches us we should not share this stuff that we're going through. But like I said before, seeing more people say my teammate recommended I come in, or often I'll hear like, oh, I know so-and-so is meeting with you. I know you can't tell me that they are, but like, oh, we were talking about our appointments the other day. So they're even talking about the work they're doing in therapy, not just that they go. Mm-hmm. And then they're comfortable to share that openly. So at least it seems to be an increasing trend that they're more open to coming in, which I think is a positive sign, but I think it's an even greater sign that peers are willing to talk to each other about it.
I think it's good just overall as a whole, because like now that because it's becoming more prioritized in all athletic departments, just in the world as a whole, it's like, oh, like I'm feeling this way, this is probably why. Whereas like maybe before, like I wouldn't have had that thought. Like if Kevin Love or DeMar DeRozan didn't come out and say like, I struggle with this is how I feel, and this is what I got diagnosed, I think maybe is the right term. I don't know if that's the right term, but like diagnosed with or whatever. And then it's like, okay, well, if I feel something similar to that, then it's probably pretty similar. Like when Kevin Love had to like come out of a game for having a panic attack, he wrote like that long thing about it, and I read it, and he's like, I couldn't breathe, I couldn't whatever. So then it's like, okay, like now I know what that is if I feel like that. And I think that's something that's also like huge. It's like the more people talk about it, the more you understand what it is. And I think that's something that's huge.
Yeah. It makes it so much more relatable, right? Like if some of our greatest athletes of all time experience these things, then it must be okay and normal if I experience it too. Mental health is health. It's not this scary monster, depression, anxiety, eating disorders, right? It's a spectrum, and it's something all of us go through at different periods of time. And the more we can normalize it, it's just a different component of health, then the more I think people will be willing to recognize it earlier and seek support. Certainly we do work with people who have diagnosable mental health conditions, but we encourage people to come in regardless of what support you need. Like, you're having really tough roommate issues and it's really stressful and hard to deal with, come in. Like, let's problem solve our way through that. Let's figure out how to communicate or what you can do to advocate for yourself. Or, you know, you're having family dynamic issues, or it's you can't decide what to do for a career and you're about to graduate in a few months and you've only thought about sport. Like, what do I do now? How do I figure this out? You don't have to have a mental health diagnosis in order to come work with us, at least in our services. But I would say most therapists are probably the same, right? Billing insurance is a little different. Thankfully, we don't have to do that here because we work on salary. But, you know, getting support is support, regardless of what the label is that you might put on it.
Do you think that, like, the panic attack that Patrick mentioned that Kevin Love wrote about, or just hypothetically, like a trouble with roommates, like something like that, do you think there's an event that always leads people to then therapy? Like, is there a breaking point that you see people at? Or would you say you see people more voluntarily, like somebody may have just mentioned, hey, I think you should come and see us? Or is there always something that happens that kind of forces them into your office?
Not always. I mean, there certainly can be. There can be something that was building and there's a tipping point that they reach, like, okay, this is it. I've got to go in. But then there are some people that are like, oh man, I'm starting to feel a little off. I'm going to go in right away. I'm going to like get some support on that. And there are people I've worked with for maybe several weeks, several months, and we end in a good place. We wrap up, we finish our work together, and then a couple months later, they're like, oh man, this one thing happened. I just want to come in for 1 or 2 sessions and kind of like revisit some of the stuff we worked on, and that's it. That's what they need. So it looks all kinds of different ways. In athletics, we're in a bit of a unique position because we work in-house, so that looks a little different in the community when someone's seeing like a private practice therapist, for example. But we are fortunate enough to have that flexibility to see people to pop in occasionally. So sometimes it's a tipping point. Sometimes it's a huge event that happens that, you know, is a final straw for people that are like, that's it. I have to figure this out. Other people come in more quickly. And so I think a lot of factors play into that. Yeah.
No, definitely. Do you, like, this is for everyone now, but, you know, for Patrick and I both, if you see someone who you think might be visibly struggling with something, you notice something may be a little off, but you never want to come out and just say, like, hey, you need therapy, like, you need to go talk to someone. But what is, like, a way that you recommend that you can say, if you're in my shoes and I see someone, like, how would you recommend me approach them and say, hey, I think that something like this could be beneficial for you. If you feel comfortable, if you want to talk to me, you know, what would you say to those people who might see someone who's struggling or know someone who's going through something?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, first is don't be afraid to ask. Usually people don't want to volunteer that. They're afraid of burdening someone else, especially their friends and family, but they desperately want someone to open up to about it. So they're hoping somebody will ask. A lot of times that's the case. So don't hesitate. Check in on those people that you think might be struggling. And the first step is just to listen. I think that's such an undervalued tool in our society. It's so hard to watch someone we care about struggle with something. But the more we're trying to give advice or fix it, usually the more we're going to push that person away. Not because what we're saying isn't helpful or well-intentioned, but because that's not what they actually need. They need someone to listen, to truly hear what they're saying, and then validate what you're going through. That is really hard. I'm so sorry you're experiencing that. Like, those kind of statements can be incredibly powerful for somebody who's struggling with anything, even just having a bad day, but certainly if they're struggling with a mental health issue that's more chronic or ongoing. And then instead of trying to fix or offer advice or what's worked for you, ask, how can I help? What can I do to support you? A lot of times they might say nothing, but like, I appreciate you listening to me. Like, I didn't realize I needed that, right? They might say something like that, or they might say, actually, like, thank you for asking. I actually need this, right? They might actually give you something, but listening feels passive, but it is such a powerful tool. And then if you do feel like it is something that someone might need help for, normalize that. Like, hey, have you ever considered therapy? Because I think it might be helpful. And if you have had experience and you feel comfortable saying like, hey, it actually helped me a lot, or, you know, I know someone who's like, making it relatable, making it normalized to go seek help is a good way to help encourage them. But know that they're going to have to go on their timeline. Right. When people get forced into counseling, you know, especially any mandated treatment, we don't see great return rates because they're not ready. This is hard work we ask people to do in our offices. You know, we're asking you to look the things that, you know, that you struggle with, that plague you day and night, that keep you up at night. Like, we're asking you to look those in the face and look within you and see what can be worked on, what can be changed, and then do the hard work of that. Nothing we do is a magic pill, is a speedy solution. It takes a lot of work, just like any type of change does. And it's emotional work, which is challenging too. So they have to be ready, and so you might have to be patient with someone you know is struggling that it doesn't feel ready to go in just yet. But be persistent. You don't have to check in every day, but check in periodically. If someone is really struggling and is maybe having suicidal thoughts or thoughts of harming themselves, that's a little different. You know, get whoever else you can to help support that person and get them into treatment, because obviously that's a higher risk level. But short of you know, safety issues, being patient with them, coming to terms that they want to seek out that help themselves. And I think we often say, hey, check in on, like, if you see something or someone's off or doesn't seem themselves, check in, and I of course endorse that, but check in with people that seem okay too, because people are really good at hiding the fact that they're struggling for a lot of reasons. But just check in on your friends, check in on your family, check in periodically. Yeah. They may not tell you what's really going on, but the fact that you cared enough to ask, you know, might stick in their brain. Yeah,
that's such an important point, because I feel like every time like anybody is to commit suicide or anything like that, it's like, oh, I didn't. You'd never know. Well, there's got to be we got to find a solution to that, because I'm tired of hearing that. Like, we got to try to get to the bottom of that and like figure that out. Because like, oh, well, they didn't show any signs. Well, fucking figure it out. You know what I mean? Like, and it's hard. It's so hard. Yeah. But it's just something that, as I think, just and I'm not saying me, Connor, you, or anybody specific. It's just kind of it's just kind of something that, as just the world, we need to kind of get to the bottom of and figure out, because too many it's happening too much, and we got to be able to kind of, I don't know, find the signs and do that. And I'm not saying it's easy. It's incredibly difficult, but it's just something that we just got to do it.
Yeah. Athlete suicide any suicide, of course, is a terrifying trend, but it's hard to tell because there's more social media coverage and things like that, and just media coverage in general. Are we hearing about it more, or statistically is it increasing? But I believe suicide is the second leading cause of death for the collegiate student athlete population. It's a really high statistic. And it seems to be happening everywhere, especially this past year. And so, yeah, I agree. Like, we're not going to be able to prevent all suicides, and that's a gut-wrenching thing to sit with. But we can do better. We have to do better. And it starts with all of us just checking in on one another and normalizing this stuff and being vulnerable enough to be open with our own struggles with other people, because you never know who's hearing that message and who's, like you said, with Kevin Love, like, oh my gosh, like, I recognize that in myself. Maybe I need to seek help, and that can be a positive realization for somebody the more we're all willing to talk about our own stuff.
Yeah. I've gotten pretty good at doing that with my friends. I don't know if I want to do that on here yet, but
maybe you don't have to.
Maybe we'll get there.
But, talking with your friends, you never know who's going to hear it, and it's going to affect them in a positive way.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely. Well, that is definitely a call to action. Check in on your friends.
Do it.
Check in on friends and family.
Wish I had a sign.
We'll get a sign. But thank you so much for joining us. This has been great.
Thank you, doctor.
We covered a lot of ground, a lot of touching stuff, but very, very important in every aspect. I feel like everything we covered was very Very important. So thank you so much for coming on. This was great.
Yeah, I'm so glad to be here, and you guys are amazing for shining a light on it. So thank you.
Definitely. All right, we're out.
Deuces. If you're struggling with obesity or losing stubborn fat, look no further because the Recenter and Corville's new medical weight loss program is a game changer. The weight loss program includes a revolutionary shot that was FDA approved in 2021, and patients can expect to see a 15 to 17% weight loss.
The Recenter's weight loss program is designed to educate patients and provide the tools needed to achieve and maintain a healthy weight. The program is managed by nurse practitioner Caitlin Whelan, who has lost over 100 pounds herself. Call 319-694-6086 to schedule your consultation. Student discounts are available.